Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sahil Malik, and I'll be talking about VSCode tips and tricks. So my contact information is up here. If you need a copy of these slides, send me an email or tweet me or anything. But probably the best way to get this content, so these slides, if you go through these slides, all the demos I'm showing here, each slide has a YouTube link at the bottom. So I've broken this whole presentation down into lots of chunks, and obviously this video itself will also be online. But if you're interested in a copy of this slide deck, send me an email, or just follow me on Twitter, or just shoot me an email and or my site. So basically, you'll be able to find all this content broken down into small digestible pieces, on my site as well. Okay, so a little bit about me. I'm a consultant, trainer. I'm a developer, hands-on, and I have been working in the Microsoft space for my whole adult life, but for the last 5-ish years, I have also been cross-platform. So when Windows 8 came out and they introduced the stop button, I got frustrated with Windows and I bought a Mac. I tried liking Windows 8, I just couldn't handle it. But then I had to justify the cost of that expensive laptop. So then I started teaching myself Objective-C and Swift and all of that. And that made me miss Visual Studio a lot. But that's how I basically became a cross-platform dev. Then over the last few years, JavaScript has been becoming very, very popular. And JavaScript and Typescript and Angular and these technologies, I feel we're truly at a turning point now, where Angular allows you to, say, build applications that both perform well, and also you have the ability to build taller buildings because the code is much better structured. And the same thing could be said about TypeScript. TypeScript, not that much about performance, but Angular too is all about performance. I think it's amazing that at dev time you can build an application, and then it's about 250 KB at dev time, and then you minify it and AOT it, and it becomes an 11 KB application. And it runs 50, 60% faster without making any code changes. This has huge implications, especially for, say, mobile devices, etc. But the reason I bring all that up is because that's what I've been doing, being a cross-platform developer. Write code in TypeScript and Angular and run it everywhere, from desktops to as an Electron app on web, and certainly as mobile applications embedded in a Xamarin Shell. But my main tool in doing all of this has been VSCode. VSCode is, Visual Studio Code. So Visual Studio, the full version, it's becoming very heavy. And I like Visual Studio a lot. So there's not a criticism of Visual Studio that's becoming heavy. But when I see things like that VS17 is going to run your unit tests as you type code, well, it's a setting that can be disabled, luckily. But that's why we need laptops with 64 gigs of RAM. That and the fact that I need to open 2 tabs in Chrome. So Visual Studio Code, on the other hand, is very lightweight. It feels like Notepad. And you know what? It works in Linux and Windows and Mac. It's fabulous how good it is. And this has been my main tool or IDE for the past, since VS Code came out. Before VS Code came out, we were looking at Sublime, Atom, Brackets was one I liked. But when VS Code came out, I was like, okay, everybody move aside. The boss is here. Okay, so how many of us here have used VS Code? Okay, great. Almost all of us. When was the last time that Visual Studio Code, not full Visual Studio, froze or hung on you? Never, right? And this is something I bragged about 2 days ago, and it froze on me. So I was like, okay, well, bad timing. But practically speaking, it almost never freezes. It's actually a very good IDE. So in this talk, I'll be talking about various tips and tricks and a little introduction of what VS Code is. So if you use VS Code, you're probably familiar with this site. Right? You can download it from Mac, Windows, and Linux. It runs beautifully on Ubuntu, for instance. And the first tip I have for you is the insider's build. Not just the insider's build, but also the previous builds. Because I have run into a situation where they'd release something and that breaks something that I desperately need fixed. And you know what, VS Code, if you've been using it, if there's an update available, it says, hey, there's an update available. Do you want to download it? right? So I find myself, so if there's something that broke and I can't wait for them to ship an update, now the update comes out very soon, tomorrow, but what am I supposed to do today? I have a deadline. Frequently, I'll just download the insider's build, and by then they've already fixed an issue, right? Especially if it's a big issue. So the first tip I have is go to github.com/Microsoft/VSCode, or go to code.visualstudio.com/insiders. So the main exe is called code, and the insiders build is code-insiders, right? So the code-insiders is a side-by-side installation. It can live with your main VS, and if in a situation where something like truly breaks, you can get the insider build and get along for another couple of days. Now, if you're really desperate, you can also go back to a previous version. All the source code is open source. Just go to this GitHub repo, and from there you can just go download the source code of any previous build and just build it, right? So that's another approach you can use. Okay, and actually with this, I'm just going to skip over slides and I'll just dive into VS Code. So I've created a little folder here. There's not much in it. This is a shell I like to use on Windows. It's called Commander. So I'm going to, let's see. Let me just go ahead and clone a repo I have. So this is a github.com/Malik Sahil, SAHIL/NGXplat. So this is a little open source thing that I put out there. It's a code repo which allows me to build an application for Linux, Mac, Windows, desktop apps, and mobile apps for literally every platform using Cordova, and a web app on all platforms with single code base. So within 10 minutes, we can have an application running on all code bases. If we have time at the end of this talk, I can perhaps demo this. But sticking with topic here, so I'm going to go in here and let's open this repo in VS Code. Okay, so this is VS Code. So the first tip is that VS Code has themes. This is a theme I like to use, but you can use whatever theme you wish. So for instance, I can say Control P and just hit greater than sign and theme, and I can choose to pick a different color theme or a file icon theme. So I can choose to make it look completely different, and I can choose to have a different set of file icons as well. So that's the first tip. And there are other themes that you can download from the marketplace, and you can have Visual Studio look and feel exactly the way you like. Now, when I'm working on code, especially when I'm working on large files, so let me see if I don't think this project has. Okay, there's somewhat of a large file. So when I'm working on code, screen real estate is very, very important, especially when I'm on the road. Because when I'm at home or in an office, I can connect external monitors, but I like to see a lot of lines of code. It makes me more productive. So one thing you can do is that you can hit F11 and it goes full screen, right? Just like the normal Visual Studio does, and to get out of this mode, you hit F11 again. And actually, one thing you can do is that you can, what they call is toggle Zen mode. And if you don't want to see anything, this is a file you're focusing on, this is all you care about, you can enable Zen mode, right? And this is the only file that will occupy your entire screen. And to get out of Zen mode, you hit escape twice, and you'll be out of Zen mode. Oh, and if you miss Visual Studio too much, and you would prefer that this sidebar be on the right-hand side, you can just toggle the sidebar to the right. I've gotten used to the left, so I'll put it back. And all of these UI elements, the status bar, this, I think it's called tool dock or something like the activity bar, and the panel, and all of these things can be hidden or shown, and you can completely customize this look and feel to your liking. All of this is stored in your profile as a file, and you can stick that file in OneDrive or Dropbox, and it'll even sync it across your multiple machines. Now, there are extensions available that'll those extensions will make this sync a little bit more smooth, so there's a chance that Visual Studio Code might introduce that setting in it. But as of now, you can just put that file in Dropbox or whatever you prefer, and it'll just sync the settings across all of your machines. Okay. Now, as I'm working on a big TypeScript project, for instance, so let's go into, let's say, the app folder. And one of the things I really like about TypeScript is that it'll tell me if there are problems before I build, right? So I can say view. So one of the things, say, you see this tilde over here, as I cannot find Angular core because I haven't done an npm install yet. So let me do that in the background. But one of the things I like to do is I say view, and I say view problems. I go to view problems, and it tells me if there are any problems in my entire namespace, a typo or anything like that. Typescript helps catch those errors for me, and I can just go ahead and click on any one of these errors, and it takes me right exactly where that error is, just like I expect out of a C# project in Visual Studio. So I have the same power here. Now, let's go back and say, let's say package.json. A lot of us might be familiar with what package.json is, but sometimes my point here is that you run into these large files that you want to edit, and there is this long, repetitive code change that you need to make. So for instance, I want to update the Angular version here. So I don't even know what the latest version is. So I'm just going to backspace this out, and I'm going to hit Control Space. And if I'm online, thankfully I am, because it would suck if I wasn't. And if I'm online, it'll tell me what are the latest versions available. So that's good. So 2.4.3. But I need to go and replace all these 2.0s with 2.0.3. How do I do that? Obviously, I can go type it everywhere. But one interesting thing you can do is that when you have a cursor here, you can hold the Alt key down, and you can, click at multiple places, and that gives you multiple cursors. Now, whatever edit I do is going to go at all of those multiple locations. Now, obviously, I'm using a trackpad, and I suck at it, so I clicked at a bunch of wrong places. Really, what I want to do is that I want to replace all those 2.0.0s with 2.4, whatever that version was, I forgot. But what I can do is that I can hit Control F, and I can search for 2.0.0, and instead of hitting Enter, I will hit Alt Enter. And I get multiple cursors, as you can see. And now any change I make goes everywhere, right? So that's another really cool trick that I find myself using a lot, multiple cursors. Okay. Now, Visual Studio Code, I'm not going to save this file, so don't save. Okay. Now, Visual Studio Code is loaded with shortcuts, and it takes time to learn those shortcuts. But there are two shortcuts that you need to remember. Everything else, Visual Studio will teach them to you. One was Control Space. That gives you IntelliSense. So anywhere you want IntelliSense, you hit Control Space, it'll give you IntelliSense. But a really cool shortcut is when you need help, what do you say? F1, right? So a really cool shortcut is F1. So anywhere in Visual Studio Code, you hit F1. And that opens the command palette. And command palette, there are a lot of interesting things you can do in command palette. So when I hit backspace, I can jump from any file to any file very quickly. For instance, if I have a big project, and especially if you're working with Angular, for instance, I'm sure other platforms have the same challenge, that your code is getting fragmented into numerous files. So I have a app.component.ts, app.component.html. And there are best practices and naming standards, but I just want to jump to that one file very, very quickly. So just backspace, type the name of the file, whichever one you're trying to jump to, it takes you right there, wherever it might be in your project. And I don't know if you noticed, but files that were in node modules were actually grouped separately, right? So files that you are interested in your source code and node modules, it allows you to jump to the node modules files, but the files that are in your source code are grouped separately. So you can jump to them very easily. But there are a whole bunch of other things you can do here as well. For instance, I can hit this greater than sign, and this greater than sign shows me a bunch of commands that I can execute here. And on the right side of the commands, it shows me what keyboard shortcuts I can, what keyboard shortcut I can use to execute that command without going through this rigmarole, right? And another thing I can do is, let's actually jump to a slightly more interesting file, like a slightly bigger file is what I was looking for. Well, okay, let's pick this big JSON file. Well, no, that's minified. Okay, I have a JSON file on my disk here. So something that's like not minified. And this data.txt is a JSON file that is not minified. So I'm just going to drag drop this here. Okay, so it is a .text file, but the .text file is actually a JSON file. So if there was an extension to it, Visual Studio Code will automatically understand that this is the extension you're trying to use. But here, I don't have that choice. But I can tell Visual Studio Code that this is not plain text. This is actually a JSON file. So let me type JSON here. And now Visual Studio Code will start recognizing this as a JSON file. And inside of the JSON file also you have good IntelliSense. If you have tied it to a schema, it'll use the schema. And it'll even give you like a basic editor with the schema. But if you're not using a schema, it'll just parse this JSON and it'll try and give you the best possible IntelliSense it can give you. For instance, under tags here, when I hit Control Space, it looks at the structure of this JSON file and it'll basically tell you, hey, these are the other tags you're using, and that just makes editing this file a whole lot easier. But anyway, that's not the point that I was driving towards. The thing that I was driving towards was this F1 key, and here I can backspace that out and hit at, right? And this at parses the symbols in this file and lets me browse across these various portions. You see where I'm the highlighted portion down there? Now, where I find this really, really helpful is that if I run into a big TypeScript file or a C# file, and I want to jump from method to method to method, right? So it will show me all the method names here, and I can quickly jump from method name to method name, and so on and so forth. And at works within this file, but if I wanted to do this across my entire project, I hit hash, and then I can search for something. And now it's going to make me look like a fool because I have a space there. Okay, let's close this. Let's try it again. So hash, no symbols matching. That's weird. Maybe I really don't have any symbols there. Okay, let's try it one more time, and then we'll move up for this. Yeah. So basically, like with hash, I have the ability to go across my entire project, and I can search for a matching symbol like that. Right? So that is very, very cool. Another thing is that at any point, I can hit question mark, as it says up there, and I can get help on the actions I can take. So for instance, EDT, show all open editors, or EXT, manage extensions, right? So there's a lot of things that I can do right through here, or jump to a line, or so on and so forth. So what commands it supports, it also sort of explains itself to you as it goes. Okay. So that is the main keyboard shortcut you need to know, F1, and from there you can discover other shortcuts. Now, the next tip is especially true when you're working with a TypeScript project. So for those of us that have been working with Angular, they've come out with something called as Angular CLI, which basically sets up an Angular project for you. So one of the challenges these days with building projects with any of these latest frameworks, React, Angular, whichever, is framework burn. Should I use Webpack? Should I use Browserify? Should I use System.js? What sort of ES6 polyfills should I use? RxJS, how much should I import? When? Oh, and then I need to build support for AOT, and that is a certain different way of doing things, and so on and so forth. Now, Angular CLI basically shortens that lifespan for you. But Angular CLI is also, like big and complex, and it's being built. So one of the complaints people have about Angular CLI is that, when I'm working on a project, I want live reload, right? So if I save a TypeScript file, it needs to get converted into JavaScript, and then my browser needs to refresh. And this should happen very quickly because I'm in the middle of debugging. I want to see what's going on. I might make a little CSS change, and I want to see exactly what's going on. I want that feedback loop to be quick. Now, in larger projects with Angular CLI, because it does bundling and minification and all of that with every F5, it may take 2 seconds, 5 seconds, even up to 12 seconds, right? Obviously, that is annoying to the developer. And the other challenge that introduced, so we're fighting two different challenges here. I don't want to save a TypeScript file until I'm ready to reload. But then it becomes annoying because I have to continuously remember to save the file. Especially when I'm going from file to file to file, I may have saved this file, I may have saved that file, but I forgot to save that one file, and now I'm puzzled why my code isn't working, right? So one of the really useful settings that I have found is Files Autosave. And actually, before I talk about Files Autosave, let me talk about settings in general. So you can hit Control-P and just type settings. So it takes you to a file called settings.json in a folder called .VSCode. But actually, we're interested in looking at settings in general. So I'm going to hit greater than sign and hit settings. And there are two kinds of settings available, user settings and workspace settings. Workspace settings are specific to this project, and those settings are in a file here, VSCode and settings.json. So if anything that I put in this settings.json is something that I intend to check in, and my whole team is going to share these settings. But then maybe there are some settings that I like, and I don't want to share with the rest of the team, but I would really like to have them, and I want them for my workspace. And those are workspace settings that go into your profile. And basically, you go here. You go to, so I'm going to say settings, and I'm going to say open user settings, right? And when I say open user settings, here I have the ability to write settings that are unique for me. And here I can say file. So there are a lot of, there's a lot of IntelliSense here with some help to it. So I can say files.autosave, and I have the ability to say off, after delay, on focus change, and on window change is new. So personally what I like to do is that I like to say after delay. And then you can specify a file save delay, autosave delay in milliseconds. So that way it doesn't keep on churning all the time. But when I make changes and when I go from file to file to file, it's a little bit more logical for me. So this is my personal favorite setting when I'm working with TypeScript code, but your personal favorite settings may be different. Also, there are a couple of other settings here that I find very useful. For instance, HTML suggests Angular 1. Angular 1 IntelliSense is baked into VS Code, and so is Ionic. But what if I'm not working on an Angular 1 project or Ionic? Then that IntelliSense becomes annoying, right? I'm trying to write ng something and it says ng-app. No, I'm not trying to write ng-app. And then I have to backspace it and fix it. But you can disable that IntelliSense at the global level, right? Another really cool tip that I'd like to share with you is this line here. So frequently what happens is that when I'm working in a TypeScript project, the TypeScript extension is .ts. And then a .js file gets created at the same path. I mean, you can control the path, but the best practice these days is that you let something like Webpack handle the minification and all that for you. So typically speaking, we would have a .js at this path. You don't want to see the .js and .js.map in your project structure because the .ts is what you are focused on. So you can hide those .js files. But on the other hand, there's a file here called jspm.config.js. I'm interested in seeing that file. So what I'd like to say is that I'm interested in hiding the .js files that have an equivalent .ts file next to them, right? So basically I say hide the .js's when a similar name .ts is present, right? So that's another very, very useful tip, especially if you're working on TypeScript projects. Now, another thing, as I said, that I like to use this terminal here. The reason I like to use Commander, that's the name of this terminal, is because, in this sort of development environment, you frequently run into, if I'm downloading a project from, say, Git, I run into a lot of code that was written on a Mac or a Linux machine. And they are using commands like cp, copy, mv for rename or move, right? Those commands don't work in DOS prompt or even PowerShell. Or perhaps you want to use PowerShell. Maybe when you say that I want to use terminal here, I want to use PowerShell. So one thing I'd like to do, I want to say right-click, open in command prompt, and you notice here that it opens Commander. It didn't open command prompt. This is also configurable in VS Code. How do you do that? Again, that was in settings. So if you go to my user settings, there's terminal.external.windowsexec, and that will basically open whichever exe you pointed to. The default value is %compspec%, which is cmd.exe, right? Now, VS Code also has a terminal built into it, and you can go view, and there is, well, the terminal is it? I forgot. Well, I remember the shortcut. It's like control backtick, but here you go, integrated terminal. And you have the ability to use a different integrated terminal as well. So on a Mac, for instance, if you prefer to use iTerm, you can configure that via settings as well. And another tip that is connected to that is that if you hit Control-Shift backtick, it'll open 2 terminal windows within VS Code. right? That's actually one of the most annoying things about the terminal built in here is that you can open only one window. No, you can actually open more than one, right? Speaking of Commander not connected to VS Code, why do I prefer to use this? Is because I can search in the log. I can hit Control F and I can search for, say, lazy, and it just finds it for me. And actually, there are a bunch of things I like about this. So far, I can say www.microsoft.com. And I can, not enter, and I can hit the Control key down, and I can hover over this, just click on a link, it'll take me to Microsoft.com, for instance. There are a lot of things I like about this, this editor. So one of the things I really like, you notice this thing on the right, basically it shows me what branch I am in. It's a Git repo, so it tells me what branch I'm in. And if I make a code change there, that green will turn into yellow, right? So it tells me that, okay, you're in this branch, but you made some code changes there. So that's very, very cool. Okay, so I talked about hiding files and folders. Now let's talk about Emmet. Okay, let's create a new file, and I'm going to say that this is an HTML file. And Emmet, you might know about Emmet is, it's basically productivity if you're writing HTML. So for instance, what I can do is that I can type HTML, tab, and it basically completes it out to /HTML. And if I want to create a li element, I have some extensions installed here, so it may interfere with the extensions, but let's try. So see, there's HTML5 snippets. That's an extension I have installed. But let's see if Emmet works with the extensions. Actually, it doesn't. So I'll have to uninstall the extension before I can demo this. But what would have happened here is that this would have created 5 LIs for me very quickly. So you might have seen this in demos, etc., that you go to, this like cheat sheet for Emmet. So it's docs.emmet.io and /cheat sheet here. And there are a whole bunch of these, shortcut keys that they have that really shorten the time, as you're writing HTML. It really helps out. But personally, Emmet is cool. I think it's great for demos. Personally, what I like to do is that I've just installed an extension, and I just have HTML snippets created for me. So for instance, like now it won't show up. Great. Let's try it one more time. HTML, tab, for instance, and li, yeah. So basically, like I have this, I have some extensions, and they're conflicting with Emmet. But if you don't have those extensions, you can use them. Okay, so I was talking earlier about keyboard shortcuts. There are a ton of keyboard shortcuts built into VS Code. So you just search for keyboard shortcuts, and you can say keyboard shortcuts reference, Control-K, Control-R at any point, and hit enter, and it takes you to a VS page hosted on the internet, which shows you all of these shortcuts that you can use. Now, I'm not, I haven't brought all of these into my personal coding experience. I think the more you learn, the better you get. Especially these basic editing ones, I'm not familiar with all of them. But if you're inclined to, you can check them out. But what's really cool is that you can customize keyboard extensions, and you can make your own keyboard extensions. So for instance, you can say keyboard extension shortcuts here. And here you have the ability to basically customize whatever keyboard extension. So these are the extensions that are available in VS Code, and there's in keybindings.json. And by the way, you could also put a keybindings.json in the .vscode folder. So for instance, one of the things I find I miss in VS Code, it just hitting F5 to start my project. Guess what? You can create a keyboard extension. But actually, F5 is better handled by another file called tasks.json. So there are tasks. There's a concept called tasks in VS Code. I'll talk about that in a second. But you can create your own extensions, and you see that if you go down here, some of these extensions are actually 2 extensions in one. For instance, let me see if I can find one. I just scrolled past one. Okay. I guess I can't find them now. Well, there are a few, like Control-K, Control-R, for instance, was one. But basically, that's like, you hit Control-K, and then you have to hit Control-R. So you can pair, 2 keywords. And then what commands can you put on those extensions? What is keyboard shortable? is this list over here. So any of these actions you can define a shortcut for. Right? So that's keyboard shortcuts. Now, one of the languages that is becoming very popular lately, I don't know if language is the right word, but one of the ways to write documents is Markdown. Right? Markdown is becoming very popular, especially amongst developers, where you want something that you can just write up in just Notepad, and it looks readable in Notepad, but it can also be formatted by perhaps a blog engine. It can be easily converted to HTML. So Markdown is like it's a HTML markup. So it's very complicated. There's a lot of power there. And then there's Markdown, which is, okay, it gives you some basic stuff like format this as code or bold or italics or something like that. So a lot of these projects will have readme.md. That's a Markdown file. So this is a Markdown file. VS Code will colorize this for you, as you see. But one other really cool thing VS Code does is that it's got this button over here that basically shows you a preview of how this file looks like. Right? So as I edit this file, I'll get a live preview of it, but it'd be nice if I can see the preview side by side. So I can click this button here to move it to the side, and then when I close this over here, and now I have a live preview of this on the right-hand side. Right? So as you know, the readme.md, if you put this in like a Git repo, that becomes the readme of that particular repo on the home page. So yeah, so that's Markdown. So it comes with a built-in Markdown preview editor, whatever you want to call it. Okay, let's quickly jump to index.html. Now, I am a developer, which by definition almost means that my designer skills suck. So when I have to do styles or CSS, frequently I get confused about what style applies where, because the CSS syntax can get pretty complicated. So my background, I've spent a lot of years in SharePoint. Please don't hold that against me. So in SharePoint, the CSS is what? 12,000 lines long? It's just crazy, right? I didn't build the product, but the really nice thing about VS Code is that when I'm doing some basics, CSS, developer level CSS, let's call it that. And what I can do over here is that, let's say that I want to be fancy, and I say some fancy style, and I'm going to say background color. So it's nice, it shows me help, that's cool. And say I can hit control space and I get nice IntelliSense. But I want to be fancy and I want to use hex codes. And I'm going to say, I don't know, like 56, 72, 32. Cool. So I picked a nice color apparently. But now the thing is that I forget this hash thing that you see on the left over here, right? That hash syntax. Is that for an element or is that for a class? Now, I know there are many in the audience here that are way smarter than me, and you'll just tell me, come on, that's for an element, okay? But I'm not that smart. So what I do is that I just go over here, and I hover over this, and it tells me exactly where that style will apply. So isn't that cool? How many of us knew this tip? This is a small thing, but this is really cool. Now, of course, if your CSS gets like really, really complicated, where it cannot be shown in a simple tooltip, because CSS can get fairly complicated. You can say the third child of this li has this color and is calculated using JavaScript. I mean, you can go really crazy with this. So obviously it won't help you to that limit. But simple stuff like, the nth child or, a dot or a hash or an element name, it'll help you with that basic CSS stuff, right? So that's very, very cool. Okay. Let's quickly jump over to package.json. Somebody was actually asking this question over breakfast, and I was glad I was able to answer it. Because see, this package.json, this is how we're describing our projects these days. Even in .NET Core, this is what we do. So in package.json, you saw that there was IntelliSense, but see what's really cool is that I can hit that double quote there, and I can hit control space, the global shortcut for anywhere you want to see IntelliSense. And this right there basically queries all the node packages available to you that are not even installed in my project. And I can pick any one of them, gives me a little help for them depending upon if they put any help there. And I can hit enter. And then here, like what version do I pick? Again, I can hit control space. And it tells me what I messed up. So I can hit Control space there. And it tells me, hey, what version is available for this package. Right? So it really, really helps me manage my package.json. But that's just dependencies. What about the other things? What about the schema for package.json? And well, there is good intelligence for that as well. For instance, I can hit Control space, and I can, pick any one of these things here and, just write this up, and it gives me a little help for, so for instance, licenses. Okay, so what is the help for this? And you click this exclamation mark, gives you nice help, go back, and so on and so forth. So it helps you manage your package.json as well. Not just package.json, they have built schemas for most of the common JSON files you'll run into. And again, with help and so on and so forth, it helps you manage these files. Now, I talked a little bit about Git. And in this project, as you see, this is a Git project. I downloaded it from GitHub. And the green thing is telling me that basically that this is a project that has not been modified, and I'm on the master branch. That's Commander. But actually, there is some very good Git integration built into VSCode as well. So for instance, let me actually go ahead and make some changes to, let's make changes to index.html. So I'm going to say, this is a new line. And I changed this line. And, well, actually, I should have changed the line a little further up because it's getting confused now. I changed this line, and this Cordova.js, let's just delete it. Okay? Now, right there, it is telling me there are these little annotations on the left-hand side. I don't know if the colors are coming out very well on the projector, but the top one is blue. That is a modified line. There's a triangle that is red, that is a deleted line, and the green on the left are edited lines. Right? So right there, it tells me that these are the changes that have been done since the last commit. But if I want to see that visually, I can click on this here, switch to the changes view. I can click on this, and it shows me a more visual view of what are the changes that have been done. And if I want to view this and say how Git shows, I can even do a switch to inline view, and I can see it like that as well. Right? So it is a fantastic diffing tool. This is actually one of the things that people install WinDiff, and I'm like, why are you installing WinDiff when you have VS Code? For instance, here, if I go into, let's go into the www folder, cd app ls. And so let's say there is an app.component.js and there is an app.component.ts. And I want to compare those two files, just two arbitrary files. So I can say code, and if I forget the command, I can say --help, and it tells me all the commands that are available. And one of the commands that is available is diff. A bunch of other interesting commands as well. But the commands that I find myself using a lot is obviously diff and disable extensions, because I download a bad extension that is causing things to go crazy, like we saw the Emmet thing broke, then you can just load it with disabled extensions. Anyway, so I can say code --diff and say app.component.js, app.component.ts, hit enter, and it opens those two files in a diff view. And actually, you don't even need to go that far. You can do this right within VS Code. So you just go here, you say, okay, I want to compare, let's say, app.routing.ts. I'm going to say right-click, select for compare, and compare with app.module.ts, and compare with this file, and it shows me a comparison. Right? So VS Code is a very, very nice diffing tool as well. Diffing comparison, it's very good for that. Nicely, colors of things and so on and so forth. Speaking of Git integration, as I make changes to the files, so I'm going to make a random change here. So let's see if Commander, so you see the color here changed, the Commander picked it up, that's cool. But you see here that this thing lit up over here is telling me that there is a change to a file, and I can just go over here and I can see what changes, what file was changed, what change was done. I can choose to stage it, I can choose to clean it, and I can choose to commit it as well. But I'm terrible at Git. I want to learn Git commands as I go. So you can do this. You can say view, output, and make sure that you enable output for Git, and it'll show you what Git commands VS Code has been executed in the backend, in the background, right? So this way you see exactly what's going on, and then when your coworker comes up, you do it from command line and just totally blow him off, right? So this is really, really cool. Okay, I'm going to clean this change and come back here. Okay, so I talked about diffing files, I talked about Git integration, and when I'm working on a big project, I'm frequently working on a number of files. And one thing I really, really like about VS Code is that when I click on this one file, it opens it here. But you notice that this title bar is in italics. That's basically telling me that it's not sticky. So for me to, if I was to open another file, it would reuse that same window. So it's not opening too many windows, it's not creating clutter. But if I want that one file to stick there, I double click on that, or I edit the file, same thing, and it'll make it sticky. Now when I open another window or another file, it'll open it in a new window. But what if I wanted to open in a second pane? You know, like this pane here, you have the ability to create multiple panes. I think you go up to 3 or 4, depending on the screen size. So if I wanted to open this app.routing.ts side by side, without going through all this complex, you know, first I open this, then I go over here and open it. I used to do that for months. But I discovered a really nice shortcut. You hold the control key down, and then you click on a button, and it opens it on the side. Right? It's a very small tip, but it's a huge time saver when you're trying to arrange these files. And when you're thinking code, you want the computer and your mind to be one. You don't want the tools to get in the way, right? So these things really matter. Okay, speaking of which, next let's talk about extensions. Extensions are really, really cool. Extensions are what make VS Code so awesome. So I'm going to hit Control P. By the way, you can just go to this button here, and that'll show you all the extensions. These are my favorite extensions. Angular 2 TypeScript snippets. If you're an Angular 2 developer, I think you'll find them really useful. But I do think that there will be replacements for this coming, officially from the team as well. But as of now, this is a huge time saver. Auto rename tag is really useful. When I'm working on HTML, and if I have a H1 tag and I want to quickly change it to an H2, if I change it to H21, it'll just automatically match it on the other. Actually, let me just demo that. It'll be easier. So let's create a H1 tag. So for instance, here if it's a H1 tag /H1, so it matches it, and I'm going to put some text in the middle. And imagine that this was a very complex file, and I want to change this tag. Like it'll match it on both sides, and it'll change it. So just a small time saver, right? So that is the HTML auto rename tag. CSS class completion is really nice, especially if I'm working with frameworks like Bootstrap, etc., or MDL for material design. Now, Material 2 is coming out, which is really nice, but it's just entered beta. But before that, we use these frameworks that are all these classes. Bootstrap has all these CSS classes that I need to know. And what this extension does, is that it looks at your entire project and sees all the CSS styles that are available to you in that page, and will show them to you in IntelliSense, right? So that's very, very cool. And the HTML snippets is just, as the name suggests, it's HTML snippets. And if I want to install more extensions, I can say, click this button here. And one of the really cool ones I like is the show recommended extensions. So the show recommended extensions, you can just type @recommended up there. And what that does is that it looks at what file extensions do you open the most. And based on that, it'll tell you, hey, these extensions might be of interest to you. Right? So actually, another extension that I really like is the Visual Studio tools for Apache Cordova. So I just go up here, I can just search for just search for Cordova. Do I already have it installed? No, I don't. So I can just click this, I can install it. Give it a second. Installing. And then reload the window, and it'll basically enable that. Right? So now that extension is available for me to use. And if I was in a Cordova project, then basically I can just go to this bug-looking thing here, and I can basically tell it that, well, I've already done that for this project, so you don't see it here. But basically here, when you click on this gear, you can configure this project to be like, you can tell VS Code what kind of project this is. Is this a Cordova project? Is this a Node project? Is it a .NET project? So I've already told it that this is a Cordova project, and then I can just choose to run Android on emulator and hit this play button here, and it'll build this project because this is also an Android project. Apparently there's some errors here because I did not add the platform Android as a Cordova platform add Android. So you still have to do that. Give it a second. Okay, Android project created. Let's give it a second. Yeah, this project is really cool. The one that I'm using as a test dummy, that basically lets you write your code in this app folder here. And let's close this. So basically, it lets you write your code in this app folder here. And whatever code you write here, it's just a simple Angular app, just one route and a to-do button and all that. And it'll basically run that same code as both Cordova and Electron and as a web page. And there are commands for this in the package.json file here, up here. So if you run it as Electron, you do this. If you run it as Cordova, just use Cordova, and so on and so forth. So is this done? Yep. Now I'm going to come back here. And that file changed. That's cool. Let's come back here, run Android on emulator, hit play. Fingers crossed. Launching for Android. This may take a while, no kidding, because it actually launches a VM. And it should, if we're lucky enough, it should basically just bring up Android. And while it is bringing that up, I will actually go here. Now, I don't think we will hit a breakpoint in this because I don't have any code here that will actually hit a breakpoint. See, I actually have no code in this. But basically, like, I could put a breakpoint here at any one of these TypeScript lines, and this happens too soon. So the breakpoint, like the debugger, get attached after the emulator pops open. But if I had some real code, like if there's a button and I click on a button and some file got called, and basically I could put that code in here, for instance, set a breakpoint here, and the breakpoint will get hit in VS Code, and you'll see that once VS Code attaches it. So I just said run on an emulator, and I can also do this on a device. But I can come here and I can say run Android on an emulator, and let's give it a second. So it should come up. Unable to find ADB. Okay, it's confused. So let's open VS Code again. Code dot. And let's come back here. So is this guy running now? It's throwing some error, but that's okay. But what I can do is here I can say attach to running Android on emulator, and hit this play button. And something's messed up with my environment right now. But if my environment was healthy, both on Mac and Windows, iOS and Android, I can directly attach to this running emulator right here and debug the code right through VS Code. Right? So that's another possibility. The thing is, like, as a cross-platform dev, on a daily basis, I'm going between Xamarin Studio, Cordova, Visual Studio, and things just break. The environment breaks all the time, and I have to fix it. But that's okay. We're not going to do that because this talk is about VS Code, so we'll stick with that. And that brings me to the final, most important slide, which is, thank you. And if you need this slide deck, please email me here. But you can find all the tips on my Twitter account as well. Or just follow my blog, and you'll find all of these tips being written out as videos on my site as well. Just give it a second to load. Am I online? I'm connected apparently. But anyway, so once my site loads, you'll see that there are blog post after blog post. And I've literally, like, each one of these tips that I shared today is shared as like a 1-minute video snippet. It won't take a lot of time. And I'm tweeting these. As I discover more things, I just quickly record a 1.5 minute video, put it online. It's not going to take a lot of time out of your day. Yeah, I'm offline, so whatever. But yeah. So with that, thank you very much. I'd love to take any questions at this point, and thank you for attending. Yes, I'm definitely offline. That sucks, but whatever. Yeah. Yes, that's in launch.json, and that demo is going to fail because my Cordova setup is broken. But basically, the first command in here gets called when you hit F5. So with VS Code, you can do this, Control-P, tasks. And the first thing is a configure a task runner. So like if you're using NPM tasks, or if you're using gulp, grunt, whatever. So you tell it what kind of task manager are you using. And the first task is F5, so whatever you connect with F5, it'll run. So yeah, so if you're in like a Cordova project, F5 will just start Cordova, Android, and attach whatever you configure it to do, basically. I think most likely the reason that Cordova thing is failing is because of the network, because it connects over the network to enable debugging. But let's not worry about that right now. Cool. I haven't seen any extensions for unit testing, but personally, my experience with unit testing in this is basically mostly doing Angular, and I just use the Karma and Jasmine, Mocha. Those are the things I use. So you just write the .spec.ts right where your component or your service is, and Angular CLI has got ng e2e. Or basically, there are two commands, E2E and run tests, and you can just run the test right there. And that also integrates very well with your, like when you check it in and with Jenkins, it'll just run it for you. So you can very easily just through point and click configure an online task runner to test your tests as well. Any extensions for that? I haven't seen any, but I haven't needed any, so I really wasn't looking for any. The JavaScript project, that's really all you need anyway. Yeah. Have you ever tried making this code portable so that you can put it on a USB stick and always have with you, so that you just double click it and you can run it everywhere you want? It is portable already because it's code.exe. Yeah. You just pick it up from your machine. It's an Electron app. The VS Code is written in TypeScript. That's the most amazing thing. But there is an installer and there is a zip file on the download page. And even if it's an installer, just go where it dropped the code.exe and you can just take that with you. On a Mac, it's a .app file, and that'll also run off of a USB stick. Somebody else had a question? Well, there are Git extensions that will show you like a Git log, and they'll show you what branch you're on, and it'll show you like there's an extension that'll the Git blame. But when it comes to like merging, to be honest, I haven't found a single tool that does that very well. When it comes to like merging, it almost always boils down to command line anyway. One of the tools I like is Git Kraken. Which shows me a very nice view of how the branches have been splitting and merging. So that's one of the nicest desktop tools I know of. It's not VS Code, but actually that tool is also an Electron app. So that is also a JavaScript thing, but not in VS Code. There's some extensions for Git log. That's a nice one, but for merging and all, not really. Okay, when it comes to debugging JavaScript code, personally, my favorite tool is still the Chrome debugging tools. There is the most popular extension here right now is the Chrome debugger extension. Honestly, why I don't understand why you'd need it. It's the most popular extension, so maybe I'm missing something. But the Chrome debugging tools are so damn good. And actually, I have a video on Chrome debugging tools that I'll tweet later. Frankly, why would you need anything else? The Chrome debugging tools are fabulous. So I just use those. VSCode has the ability to connect to a running Chrome extension and Chrome browser, and then you can debug through Visual Studio Code. I really don't find that very useful, to be honest. It's good, but the Chrome debugging tools are better. So I just use those. That's personally what I do. The Chrome debugging tool, there's so many tips and tricks there, holy crap. Like, that's another talk that it's like, when I show those tips and tricks, everybody's like, wow, there's some good stuff there. I wish I had time to go into those, or I wish I had a talk on that here. But Chrome debugging is fantastic. But I have a video on that online, and I'll tweet that maybe later tonight. Okay, so we're almost out of time, but I'll be in the halls. If there are any questions, I'd love to take them. Thank you.